Hey everyone, ahlan wa sahlan feekum. Today we're going to learn about relative clauses in Arabic. I know it sounds complicated, but all it means is we're going to learn how to make more complex sentences where we give further information about a topic within the sentence itself. In any language, this is done by creating a descriptive little sentence within a sentence, a relative clause that is attached to a noun in a larger sentence. For example, I went to the restaurant can be expanded into I went to the restaurant you told me about. The you told me about is a relative clause that gives further information about the restaurant. In English, most relative clauses are framed with the word that, which is actually optional most of the time. The restaurant that you told me about. The computer that I bought, and so on. But other words frame relative clauses too, such as the guy who called me yesterday, or the park where we went for a walk. So let's learn how to do that in Arabic right now. Okay, first let's examine in English the structure of the sentence, I went to the restaurant you told me about. So the phrase we want to make is the restaurant you told me about, which is composed of three parts. First, the noun that you're giving further information about, in this case, the restaurant. Second, the relative marker. In this case, it's the word that, which is optional in English. Third, you told me about, which is essentially a mini sentence in itself, but the part that's missing becomes the head of the relative clause. So you told me about the restaurant becomes the restaurant that you told me about. Now let's take this step by step in Arabic. First, the head word would be il-mat'am. That much is exactly the same. Now the other part we can fill in is the relative clause itself, which is حكيت لي عن, meaning you told me about. But I'll come back to that in a minute. The main question you might have is what are the relative clause markers in the dialect? Well, there's actually basically only one, Illi. So Illi means that or which, but also who, what, or where. Okay, so now we have il-mat'am Illi حكيت لي عن. In English, that's all you need. But in Arabic, it's actually still incomplete because there's a fourth component to a relative clause that is really, really important. Again, take a look at the sentence, you told me about the restaurant. When we make a relative clause, we remove the restaurant from the sentence by bringing it to the front. That just leaves us with you told me about. But in Arabic, the relative clause has to still be a complete sentence. So when we remove the restaurant, we have to make sure to insert a pronoun to take its place. That's the fourth component. So in Arabic, grammatically, it has to be the restaurant that you told me about it. As you can see, you told me about it is a complete sentence. And the it refers to the head word, the restaurant. So it's il-mat'am illi حكيت لي عنه. Let's try the park where we went for a walk. Il-mantazi, the park. Illi, again it's illi for everything. تمشينا, we went for a walk. فيها. It's فيها because we went for a walk in is not a complete sentence. It must be تمشينا فيها. We went for a walk in it. المنتزه اللي تمشينا فيها. المطعم اللي حكيت لي عنه. الكمبيوتر اللي شريته. The computer that I bought it, and so on. As you can see, depending on the sentence, you might attach the suffix after a preposition or after the verb itself. You may even have to use a whole object pronoun rather than just the suffix. For example, الصورة اللي بعتلك إياها. The picture that I sent it to you. Remember, the reason you have to use the object pronoun is because the indirect object takes priority and gets attached to the verb. So the direct object gets tacked on afterwards as this separate word, إياه. Check out my video on the object pronoun for more on that. There's really only one case where you obviously don't need to use the suffix, which is when the head word itself is the one who is doing the action of the relative clause. For example, the guy who called me is just الزلمة اللي رنلي. If you think about it, called me is not a complete sentence in English, but actually ranli is a complete sentence in Arabic. Because remember, the subject in Arabic is optional in verbal sentences since the verb already implies the subject. So, since it's a complete sentence, there's no need to insert a pronoun of any sort. To round off this part of the video, let's take a look at this complex sentence. اللي بدي إياه هو بس إنك تحكيلي على وين رايح. The first part is اللي بدي إياه. Remember, biddi iya means I want it. And you have to use the object pronoun because biddi is one of those rare words that has a verbal meaning, but that is conjugated by using suffixes. And you can't stack suffixes, so it's biddi iya, I want it. What's interesting about the sentence is that the relative clause has no head word. It's not like the restaurant that you told me about, but just what I want. And that works perfectly fine in Arabic, just as it does in English. The reason there's no head word is because we're actually defining the relative clause in a nominal sentence. In other words, this is that type of sentence. Where in Arabic, you don't use a verb because the is implied in the present. So there's no head word because that's what the sentence is defining. What I want is blah blah blah. Alright, the next part is huwa bas innak. Why huwa? Who is huwa? This huwa refers, of course, to illi biddi iyah, what I want. Huwa, and even though it seems redundant in English, the reason it's there is to create the sense of is, which in Arabic is missing. So illi biddi iyah, huwa, it is, bas, only or just, innak, that, what I want, it is, just that, blah blah blah. It's kind of hilarious how the English translation will completely mess you up because this what is not shu, and even though illi can mean that, as in the restaurant that you told me about, in this case that is innak. So why is it innak, and what's the difference between illi and innak, innu, inni, and so on? Actually, even though these words overlap in English, in Arabic illi and innu have 100% completely different uses. Again, illi is used to create relative clauses that give further information about a noun and are inherently linked to that noun, as in the computer that I bought. Whereas innu is used to introduce other more generic types of subordinate clauses, as in I told you that I bought a computer, or I know that you're busy. I bought a computer and you're busy aren't defining or referring to anything within the sentence. They're just mini sentences that operate as a single unit, in this case as the object of what I told you or what I know, etc. So illi biddi iyah huwa bas innak, what I want, it is just that you تحكيلي, tell me, in the subjunctive because it's a hypothetical, I want you to tell me, على وين رايح, to where you're going. Notice again that even though illi can mean where, here we said when because على وين رايح isn't referring back to anything. Rather, it's a question, where are you going? That is functioning as a unit, as the object of تحكيلي. Tell me what? Well, tell me where you're going. Compare that to المكان اللي رايح عليه, the place where you're going to it. Notice the difference. Here we do use illi because رايح عليه is referring to what? المكان. Also notice that على became عليه because it's as though you had رايح على المكان and then when you took out the المكان and placed it at the front, the ها suffix came in to substitute for it. Quite a tricky sentence. اللي بدي إياه هو بس إنك تحكيلي على وين رايح. All I want is for you to tell me where you're going. Just by analyzing this one sentence, you can see so many different ideas in action. So I really encourage you to join me as I read those annotated transcripts, where we see many sentences like these as we go word by word through realistic dialogues, taking time to work carefully through all these ideas. Now you may be wondering, in English, the word that is optional. Is illi mandatory in Arabic? The answer is absolutely, sort of. Think of illi as a lamp that you turn on and off. When you turn it off, it's still there, it's just that you can't see it. In reality, the visibility of illi switches on and off depending on whether the noun that is being described is definite or indefinite. As you know, adjectives in Arabic take the article al when the noun they modify is definite, as in السيارة الجديدة. Or if the noun is indefinite, then of course nothing takes the article, سيارة جديدة. Basically, illi works in the exact same way. So much so that when the noun it modifies is indefinite, the whole sentence structure stays the same, but illi itself completely disappears, as if you had just turned it off. So for instance, in the sentence, the guy who called me, the guy is definite. It's a specific guy. So it's الزلمة اللي رن لي. But what if I wanted to say someone who works with me? This someone is indefinite, because it's an unspecified random person who we don't know about. So how do we say this? The whole sentence structure is the same. It's just that the illi disappears. So it's really just حدا, someone, blank, بيشتغل معي, someone who works with me, even though the word that normally represents who, illi, is missing. Another example could be something I ate, as in مرضت من, I got sick from, something I ate. The something is undefined, so it's just مرضت من إشي blank أكلته. Remember the illi is just off, but everything else works exactly as usual. So notice we still need the suffix that refers back to the head word ishi. So it's ishi akalto, something I ate it. The really important difference is that in English you can say something that I ate or something I ate, and it means exactly the same thing. But in Arabic, the word illi must be used when the relative clause refers to something definite, but it must not be used if it refers to something indefinite. Whether illi is there is not actually optional, and it makes a difference. So ishi illi akalto is wrong, and so is al-computer sharetu. They're both wrong, so be careful. We've covered a ton of ground today, so actually the last thing should be pretty easy to explain at this point. As you know, illi is used where a lot of different words are used in English. That, which, where, what, who, and so on. There's only one type of word that illi is not used for, and for which a unique word exists. That word is lemma, and it means when. On the surface, it seems to belong to the same category of words, but unlike illi, lemma doesn't really refer back to a noun. So overall, it functions a bit more like innu. What the word lemma does, like innu, is that it opens a new mini sentence that functions as a single unit that defines when something happened. So for example, when I went to work today. لما رحت على الشغل اليوم. Another way to think about it is as answering the actual question, when. إمتى شريت الهدية? When did you buy the gift? لما رحت على السوق. When I went to the market. It's pretty straightforward, honestly. Anyway, that's all I have for now. It was a lot to unpack, but these words, illi, innu, and lemma, are really crucial for those of you who are ready to start building more complex sentences. As I said before, you can watch the annotated transcript videos for many more real-life examples of these really important words in action. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.
اهلا حبايبي وشكرا للجماعه اللي بيحضروا القناه. اذا بدكم تكملوا تشوفوا هالفيديوز اعملوا سبسكرايب، واذا شفتوني مؤخرا تفضلوا روحوا شوفوا الفيديوز الماضيه بالبلاي ليست. وتذكروا اني عملت مصادر لتعلم اللهجه الفلسطينيه تقدروا تلاقوها بالموقع تبعي اللي مكتوب تحت بالديسكربشن. ونشوفكم المره الجايه.